Imagine this, a brand new aircraft, proudly introduced as a future of aviation, quickly becoming the one plane people were too afraid to board. That's exactly what happened to the McDonnell Douglas DC-10, a wide-body jetliner that went from airline pride to a symbol of controversy, all in just a few short years. The trouble began with a simple but fatal flaw. The cargo door had a critical design issue, one that, as history would soon reveal, would claim hundreds of lives. Before the DC-10's problems made headlines, few passengers gave it a second thought. But after a catastrophic accident in Chicago, even the smallest details, like the way its engines were mounted, came under intense scrutiny. Despite the disasters and damning investigations, the DC-10 would eventually go on to earn a reputation for being safe, reliable, and even revolutionary in some ways. But for the company that built it, the damage was permanent. Let's rewind to the early 1970s, a pivotal time in commercial aviation. Air travel was no longer just for the wealthy elite. It was becoming accessible to the middle class. And a big reason for that? New aircraft designs. Back in the 1960s, planes like the Boeing 707 were narrow-bodied, with just a single aisle and 6 seats across. But in the 70s, something new arrived on the scene: the wide-body jet. With an extra aisle and more seats, these aircraft promised cheaper tickets and higher passenger capacity. Leading the way was Boeing's 747, introduced in 1970. It was the world's first wide-body, instantly doubling the size of previous passenger jets. The jumbo jet became a symbol of the jet age almost overnight. But Boeing wasn't alone. Competitors scrambled to join the wide-body race. In 1971, McDonnell Douglas unveiled its answer, the DC-10. With a distinctive 3-engine layout, 1 engine on each wing and a third at the base of the tail, the DC-10 promised better fuel economy, lower maintenance costs, and seating for anywhere between 255 and 380 passengers. Passengers loved it. The plane offered larger windows, a quieter cabin, and more spacious interiors than anything they'd flown before. McDonnell Douglas was confident this aircraft would be a hit, and airlines lined up to place their orders. But they weren't the only ones chasing the market. Rival aircraft manufacturer Lockheed was also working on a 3-engine wide-body, the L-1011 TriStar. The two planes were virtually identical in purpose, but there was one key difference. Lockheed's TriStar was packed with cutting-edge technology, while McDonnell Douglas took a more cautious approach, relying on tried-and-true systems from their earlier DC-8 and DC-9 models. That decision allowed McDonnell Douglas to get the DC-10 into service faster, and for less money.
At first, this gamble paid off. The DC-10 entered service ahead of the L-1011 TriStar. And because it was cheaper to produce, McDonnell Douglas quickly began outselling its rival. Passengers praised the DC-10 for its smooth ride, and some even called it one of the quietest aircraft they'd ever flown in. The future looked bright for the company and their sleek new tri-jet. But behind the scenes, cracks were already forming, both figuratively and literally. A string of troubling incidents started to pile up. Some were mechanical, others operational, but each one chipped away at public confidence. By the mid-1970s, people weren't so sure about this futuristic aircraft anymore. And then came a string of disasters that would stain the DC-10's reputation for years. One of the earliest and most shocking incidents happened in 1974. A Turkish Airlines DC-10 departing from Paris suffered a catastrophic failure when its cargo door, yes, that same notorious design flaw, blew open mid-flight. The sudden decompression severed crucial hydraulic lines, leaving the pilots powerless to control the plane. It crashed into a forest outside the city, killing all 346 people on board. At the time, it was the deadliest aviation accident in history. Even more disturbing was what came out in the investigation. McDonnell Douglas had known about the issue before the DC-10 even entered service. During ground testing, a cargo door had previously blown open, exposing the very flaw that would later doom Flight 981. Rather than issuing a mandatory fix or redesigning the latch mechanism, the company opted for a service bulletin, basically a strongly worded suggestion. Some airlines acted on it, others didn't, and the consequences were catastrophic. Naturally, McDonnell Douglas faced massive lawsuits, including what was then the largest aviation lawsuit in history from the families of those killed in the crash. It was a PR nightmare, and the company's reputation took a brutal hit. But the worst was yet to come. Fast forward to 1979, and tragedy struck again, this time in Chicago. An American Airlines DC-10 crashed just after takeoff from O'Hare Airport, resulting in 273 fatalities. It remains the deadliest aviation accident ever to occur on U.S. soil. Once again, the media went into a frenzy. News anchors warned viewers about flying on DC-10s, and headlines painted the plane as cursed. The FAA did something unprecedented. It grounded all DC-10s in the United States. For 5 chaotic weeks, DC-10s sat idle on tarmacs across the country. International carriers flying the model were banned from entering U.S. airspace. The investigation pointed to a maintenance issue, a flaw in how the engine pylons were being removed for inspections. But the damage to public trust was already done. Passengers began asking themselves, is it even safe to get on one of these planes anymore?
At airports across the country, it was chaos. Stranded passengers scrambled to rebook flights, while news cameras captured long lines, frustrated travelers, and empty DC-10s sitting motionless by the gates. One passenger, when asked how he planned to get to his destination now, shrugged and said, "I have no idea. I grabbed my luggage from the mess downstairs and I don't know where I'm going from here." That was the vibe everywhere. Tension, uncertainty. Nobody wanted to be on a DC-10, and you couldn't really blame them. In places like Los Angeles, where every evening news broadcast seemed to feature another story about a DC-10 disaster, nerves were on edge. Even veteran flyers were uneasy. Some airlines started quietly removing the DC-10 from their most popular routes. Others pulled the aircraft from advertising materials altogether. The real irony? The Chicago crash wasn't actually caused by a design flaw in the DC-10 itself. It was the result of improper maintenance practices by the airline. Technicians had been lifting the entire engine and pylon assembly as a unit during routine inspections, a shortcut that placed dangerous stress on the wing mounts. Eventually, one failed, sending the engine tearing off the wing during takeoff. The problem was, by this point, it almost didn't matter. The public had already made up its mind about the DC-10. The aircraft had a reputation, and in aviation, reputations are everything. But the story of the DC-10's troubled past doesn't end there. Let's rewind a few years to another near disaster. In 1972, a DC-10 operating for American Airlines narrowly avoided tragedy after experiencing the exact same cargo door malfunction that would later doom Turkish Airlines Flight 981. The door blew open shortly after takeoff, causing a rapid decompression. Miraculously, the pilots managed to land the aircraft safely thanks to quick thinking and sheer luck. One of the hydraulic systems remained functional just long enough to save them. What makes this event even more shocking is that McDonnell Douglas was already aware of the cargo door issue before this incident happened. During testing, one had blown open on the ground, but rather than redesign the system or issue an emergency mandate, they negotiated their way out of a formal FAA airworthiness directive. Instead, they sent out a service bulletin advising airlines to reinforce the door latching mechanisms. Some followed through, others didn't. And that's why, by the time of the Turkish Airlines crash, it was painfully clear that the tragedy could have been prevented. After that crash, McDonnell Douglas faced wave after wave of lawsuits, including some of the largest in aviation history. When it became obvious they were going to be held responsible, the company quietly settled the cases. But the damage to their image was permanent. By now,
the DC-10's reputation was in tatters. The media coverage following the Turkish Airlines and Chicago disasters was relentless. News anchors speculated about the plane's airworthiness. Editorials questioned how an aircraft with such glaring issues was ever allowed to fly passengers in the first place. And while some of this coverage was sensationalized, as the media tends to do, much of it was rooted in legitimate concerns. Beyond the cargo door and the Chicago crash, there were whispers in the aviation community about whether McDonnell Douglas had cut corners to get the DC-10 to market faster than its rival, the Lockheed L-1011. See, the DC-10 and the L-1011 had essentially been racing for the same customers. And while Lockheed's plane was more technologically advanced, with better redundancy systems and cutting-edge features, it suffered costly delays and production issues. McDonnell Douglas, on the other hand, prioritized simplicity and speed. And while that meant the DC-10 hit the market first and at a lower cost, some began to wonder if safety had been compromised in the process. In hindsight, it's clear that both companies were chasing a market that might not have been big enough for two tri-jet wide-bodies in the first place. By the early 1980s, it became apparent that airlines were losing interest in three-engine designs. What they really wanted were twin-engine, fuel-efficient, wide-body aircraft. Planes like the Airbus A300 and the soon-to-come Boeing 767. McDonnell Douglas tried to pivot. They introduced the MD-11, an updated, stretched version of the DC-10 with modern avionics and improved fuel efficiency. The company hoped it would revive their wide-body business, but the market had already moved on. The days of the tri-jet were numbered. And yet, despite all of this, the crashes, the lawsuits, the grounding, the media storm, the DC-10 would ultimately go on to enjoy a surprisingly long career. In fact, the DC-10 would remain in service for more than 40 years, flying with major carriers like United, American, and Continental, as well as numerous international airlines. Even after being retired from passenger service, many DC-10s found a second life as cargo planes and military tankers, with some still flying today under different roles. Statistically, once its early teething problems were addressed, the DC-10's long-term safety record ended up being comparable to other wide-bodies from its era, and in some cases, even better than some older aircraft still in operation. It became known for its sturdy build, reliable systems, and ease of maintenance. Mechanics loved working on it. Pilots appreciated its handling, and in its own way, the DC-10 helped democratize air travel, making long-distance flying affordable and accessible for millions around the world. So here's the real takeaway about the DC-10. It's a plane that perfectly represents both the ambition and the risks of the early jet age. It was a product of a time when airlines and manufacturers were racing to revolutionize air travel, competing to build faster, bigger, and cheaper jets for a world that was suddenly eager to fly. And like many products of that era, it came with its share of hard lessons. Yes, the DC-10 had a rough start. There's no sugarcoating it. Design oversights, corporate corner-cutting, and a few bad decisions created tragedies that could have been avoided. It was a textbook example of what can happen when speed to market takes priority over thorough safety protocols, and for that, people paid with their lives. But at the same time, the DC-10 is also proof that aircraft can recover from their reputations, because once those early design issues were corrected and airlines revised their maintenance procedures, the DC-10 became a workhorse. It was a plane that could haul huge loads across oceans, land on shorter runways, and keep flying reliably for decades. In a way, the DC-10 was both a cautionary tale and a redemption story, and its legacy still lingers today. If you've ever seen a FedEx freighter overhead or a KC-10 military tanker refueling fighter jets mid-air, you've seen a DC-10, or at least what's left of one. Even though most passenger variants have long since retired, some of these planes are still working, still flying, still earning their keep.
Not bad for a plane that, at one point, people were too scared to board. It also left a mark on how aviation safety is handled today. Many of the regulatory changes and maintenance protocols introduced after the DC-10's early disasters shaped modern aviation standards. In a way, the mistakes made on this aircraft indirectly made the skies safer for everyone who came after. What do you think? Was the DC-10 unfairly maligned, or did it deserve its rough reputation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. If you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more aviation stories, and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Until next time, fly safe.